When a restaurant manager humiliates and kicks Will Smith out, he has no idea that his actions will be a fatal mistake. Find out how this moment of humiliation turned into triumph and what followed this shocking confrontation. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss news stories, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The Los Angeles sun hung low in the evening sky, casting a golden hue over the bustling city streets. Will Smith leaned back in the driver's seat of his sleek black SUV, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. The past few months had been a whirlwind. Intense filming schedules, late-night meetings, and relentless promotional tours. But tonight was different. Tonight, he was just Will, celebrating life with his closest friends. His phone buzzed with a message from Tina. "Tina, we're at the studio, heading to the spot, can't wait." Will chuckled. Tina, with her soulful voice and fiery activism, had always been a constant in his life. She was someone who championed causes close to her heart, and one of the reasons he felt this night was so important. It wasn't just about relaxing. It was about showing his friends how much he valued their support and inspiration. In the back seat, Jaden scrolled through his playlist. "You sure about this restaurant, Pops? I hear it's kinda stiff." Will glanced at his son through the rearview mirror. "Trust me, Jay, Eminence Dining is the place. It's upscale but chill, perfect for the crew." Jaden shrugged. "If you say so." As they pulled into the driveway of the recording studio, the rest of the group was already waiting. Tina stood by the curb in a flowing crimson dress, her curls framing her face. Beside her, Jason, the ever-passionate activist, was deep in conversation with Larrick, a young filmmaker whose indie projects had started gaining traction in Hollywood. Their laughter echoed through the evening air as Will parked the car. "Finally!" Tina exclaimed, throwing her arms around Will in a warm hug. "You're late," Jason teased. "Traffic," Will replied, gesturing toward the congested streets behind them. "But, hey, it's my party. Can't start without me." Jason smirked. "Technically, it's our party. You're just the guy paying the bill." The group burst into laughter. Will felt a wave of gratitude. These weren't just friends, they were family. They had been with him through the highs and lows, through triumphs and setbacks, always pushing each other to be better. As they piled into the SUV, the conversation shifted to the restaurant. Eminence Dining was known for its exclusivity and gourmet cuisine, a favorite among celebrities and power players in the city. It was the kind of place where deals were made, where connections were forged over five-star meals and fine wine. Will had dined there a few times before, always enjoying the quiet elegance and impeccable service. "Is place really that fancy?" Larrick asked, adjusting his tie. "I feel like I should have rented a tux." Tina rolled her eyes. "Relax, it's just dinner. Besides, we're with Will. They'll roll out the red carpet." Will chuckled but said nothing. He wanted his friends to feel special tonight, to enjoy the finer things without the usual pressures of work or public scrutiny. Tonight was about celebration and connection, a rare moment to breathe in the chaos of their lives. The SUV glided through the gates of Beverly Hills, the streets lined with palm trees and opulent mansions. As they neared the restaurant, the city's energy seemed to shift. The air was tinged with the scent of blooming jasmine, the sidewalks gleaming under the golden glow of streetlights. Eminence Dining stood at the corner of an intersection, its minimalist facade exuding quiet sophistication. A valet approached the vehicle, opening the door for Will as the others climbed out. What happened next would change everything. Eminence Dining exuded quiet sophistication. The restaurant's sleek, modern facade was understated yet inviting, the kind of place where exclusivity was expected. As the valet approached, he opened the door for Will with a courteous nod while the rest of the group climbed out. The crisp evening air carried the faint scent of citrus and jasmine from the carefully curated landscaping around the entrance. The group exchanged glances, a mixture of excitement and anticipation. Inside the restaurant was a symphony of luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over polished mahogany tables. The soft hum of quiet conversation, punctuated by the occasional clink of glasses, created an atmosphere of refined intimacy. The waitstaff, dressed in tailored uniforms, moved with a practiced efficiency, their expressions calm and composed. Will approached the hostess stand, his confident smile as natural as ever. "Reservation for Smith, party of 6. The hostess, a young woman with sharp features and a sleek ponytail, glanced at the screen in front of her. For the briefest moment, her expression faltered, but she quickly straightened. "One moment, sir." The group waited as the hostess disappeared into the back. Jason leaned in, lowering his voice. "Something feels off." Will waved a dismissive hand. "It's fine. Probably just double-checking. These places run tight schedules." Minutes passed. The energy shifted. When the hostess returned, her demeanor was colder, more rigid than before. "I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, but it appears there's been an error with your reservation. We don't have a table available at the moment." Will frowned, his jaw tightening. "That's impossible. I confirmed this morning." The hostess avoided his gaze. "Unfortunately, we are fully booked tonight. I apologize for the inconvenience." Tina crossed her arms, a sharp edge creeping into her voice. "You're telling me this whole place is packed? We just walked in and saw 3 open tables." The hostess's smile tightened. "Those are reserved for other guests." Will's patience was wearing thin. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable weight behind it. "Look, we don't want to make a scene. Just check again. We've had this planned for weeks." Before the hostess could respond, a man in a tailored suit emerged from the back. His presence was commanding, but his eyes carried something colder. Irritation. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone polite but clipped. Will turned to him. "Apparently, our reservation doesn't exist anymore. Mind explaining how that happened?" The man's smile was calculated, practiced. "Mr. Smith, I apologize for the confusion, but we must adhere to our reservation policy. Tonight, we are at full capacity." The group exchanged incredulous glances. Jason stepped forward. "You're kidding, right? This is Will Smith. You're seriously turning him away?" The manager's expression didn't waver. His voice sharpened, the practiced politeness slipping just enough to reveal his true feelings. "We treat all our guests equally here. If you don't have a reservation, we cannot accommodate you." Will felt his chest tighten, the weight of dozens of eyes pressed against his back. The whispers had already begun rippling through the restaurant, some guests watching with curiosity, others with something closer to amusement. He had faced discrimination before. He knew what this was. He wasn't going to beg for a seat at their table. "Let's go," he said quietly, turning toward the door. Jason hesitated. "Will," I said, "let's go." Reluctantly, the group followed. Their celebratory mood had shattered, leaving behind only cold disbelief and quiet anger. Outside, the night seemed darker, the glow of the streetlights harsher. Will took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had faced countless challenges in his life, but this one cut deeper. It wasn't just about him. It was about what he represented. As they drove away, the silence in the car was heavy, almost suffocating. The usual chatter and jokes were gone. Tina, usually full of energy, stared blankly ahead, her jaw clenched. Larrick gazed out the window, his fists clenched in his lap. It was Jason who finally broke the silence. "That wasn't just about a reservation," he muttered, his voice low and bitter. "You all felt it, didn't you? The way they looked at us?" Will kept his eyes on the road, his grip tightening on the wheel. He didn't respond right away. He wasn't ready to put into words the storm brewing inside him. The humiliation, the anger, the bitter taste of injustice. Jason's frustration boiled over. "Man, this is Will Smith. You've been in their movies, filled their theaters, probably even helped pay for that damn chandelier, and they still treated you like that?" "Enough," Will snapped, his voice low but sharp. Jason fell silent, though his expression remained tight with anger. Jaden, who had been quietly observing from the back seat, finally spoke. "It's not just about Dad," he said softly. "They treated all of us like we didn't belong, like we weren't good enough." The words hung in the air, undeniable. Will exhaled, trying to focus on the road, but his mind kept replaying the scene, the hostess's dismissive tone, the manager's condescending smile, the way they had been so casually dismissed in front of an entire room of people. When they finally reached Tina's place, she hesitated before getting out of the car. Her voice, usually so strong, was quieter now. "Will," she said, searching his face, "you can't let this go." Will met her eyes, the faintest flicker of a smile breaking through his hardened expression. "Oh, we won't," he said simply. His voice was calm, but his jaw was set with unwavering determination. The restaurant had turned them away. Now, the world was about to find out exactly what that mistake would cost them. As the car slowed in front of Tina's home, she hesitated before stepping out. Her voice, usually filled with fire, was softer now, almost pleading. "Will," she said, her eyes searching his, "you can't let this go." Will met her gaze, the faintest flicker of a smile breaking through his hardened expression. "I won't," he said simply. "But I need to think." Tina nodded, squeezing his hand briefly before stepping out of the car. One by one, the rest of the group dispersed, leaving Will and Jaden alone in the silence of the vehicle. Jaden glanced at his father, hesitant. "You okay, Dad?" Will exhaled deeply, leaning back against the headrest. "I'm fine, Jay, just tired." But as they pulled into the driveway of their home, he knew that wasn't the whole truth. He wasn't just tired. He was angry. Angry at the restaurant, angry at a system that allowed places like Eminence Dining to thrive, and more than anything, angry at himself for walking away without saying more. Inside the house, the silence felt heavy, pressing against him like a weight. Jaden quietly retreated to his room, leaving Will alone in the dimly lit living room. He sat there for a moment, staring at his phone as it buzzed with notifications. Messages flooded in from his friends. Tina had already posted about the incident, her words raw and unfiltered. Jason had followed suit, his post a fiery call for accountability. Even Larrick, usually the most reserved of the group, had shared a photo of the restaurant with a simple but cutting caption, "Not for everyone." Will's fingers hovered over the screen. He could feel the weight of his platform, the millions of eyes that would be on him if he spoke out. He knew that whatever he said next would carry power, but he also knew that staying silent would eat away at him. Finally, he opened the camera app and hit record. Sitting on the edge of the couch, he looked directly into the lens. His expression was calm, but there was an undeniable fire in his eyes. "Tonight, something happened that I can't ignore," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "My friends and I went to a restaurant, a place I've been to before, a place I thought respected me, respected us. But tonight we were turned away, not because there wasn't space, not because they couldn't accommodate us, but because of who we are." He paused, letting the words settle. "I've faced a lot in my life. I've worked hard to get where I am. I've created opportunities, built spaces for others, and tried to be part of something bigger than myself. But moments like this remind me that no matter how far we've come, there's still so much further to go." Will ended the video with a simple but powerful statement. "This isn't just about me, it's about all of us, and it's time for things to change." He hit upload and set his phone down. Within minutes, the comments started pouring in, a mix of outrage, support, and heartbreaking stories from others who had faced similar treatment. The momentum was instant. By morning, "Not at our table" was trending. The story had spread like wildfire, and Eminence Dining's name was splashed across headlines. Will woke to a flood of notifications. Celebrities, activists, and everyday people had rallied around his post. Some shared their own experiences of discrimination. Others called for a boycott of the restaurant. Eminence Dining scrambled to do damage control, issuing a vague corporate statement apologizing for any misunderstandings. But it was too little, too late. The damage had already been done. As Will scrolled through the responses, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about that night. It wasn't just about him. This was bigger. This was a movement. His phone rang. Jason's name flashed on the screen. "Man, have you seen this?" Jason's voice buzzed with energy. "They're scrambling. This could be huge." Will leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's not about them scrambling," he said. "It's about making sure this doesn't happen again." Jason paused, then asked the question Will had been expecting. "So, what's the plan?" Will's smile faded. His expression turned serious, his mind already racing ahead. "We create something better," he said. "A table where everyone is welcome, and we make sure the whole world knows about it." The fire in Jason's voice was unmistakable. "I'm in, whatever you need." Will hung up, his thoughts moving faster than his heartbeat. This wasn't just about calling out Eminence dying anymore. This was about creating something lasting. And that was exactly what he was going to do. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about building something bigger, something that could outlast the indignity of one night, and Will knew exactly where to start. The next day dawned with a different kind of energy. The soft Los Angeles sunlight streamed through the windows, but it did little to lift the tension that hung in the air. Will sat at his kitchen table, his eyes locked on his phone as it buzzed with an endless stream of notifications. He had expected some response to his video, but what he saw was beyond anything he had imagined. The number of views, comments, and shares had skyrocketed overnight. His words had struck a nerve, and now the public was fully aware of what had happened. The humiliation he and his friends had endured wasn't just another Hollywood scandal. It was a moment that resonated with thousands of people who had faced the same quiet, insidious discrimination. Jaden entered the kitchen, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He paused when he saw his father's focused expression and the phone screen lighting up with constant updates. "Oh, Dad, you're trending. And not just in the usual way," Jaden said, sliding into a chair across from him. Will looked up, a weary smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Yeah, seems like people are listening." Jaden grabbed his own phone and started scrolling. "People are mad, and I mean really mad. Have you seen the stuff people are saying about Eminence dining?" Will nodded. He had spent most of the early morning hours reading the flood of comments. Stories of discrimination, humiliation, and exclusion. People from all over were sharing their own experiences of being turned away, ignored, or outright insulted simply because of who they were. The floodgates had opened, and each story was more heartbreaking than the last. Tina's post had only added fuel to the fire. Her raw, passionate words had struck a chord, calling out the hypocrisy of a society that pretended to embrace diversity while still systematically excluding those who didn't fit into a narrow mold. Meanwhile, Jason had turned into a one-man crusade, reposting every comment, every story, tagging celebrities and influencers to amplify the conversation. The movement wasn't slowing down. It was building momentum. Will's phone buzzed, and Jason's name flashed across the screen. He answered immediately, hearing the electric energy in his friend's voice. "Well, man, have you seen this?" Jason sounded like he had just sprinted across a football field. "Not at our table is everywhere. Journalists are calling, people want interviews, it's insane." Will leaned back in his chair, glancing at Jaden, who was now fully engaged in his own phone. "Yeah," Will said, running a hand over his face. "It's bigger than I thought it would be." "This is our chance, Will," Jason continued, his voice urgent. "We can't let this die down. People are finally listening. We need to do something." Will sighed. He knew Jason was right. This wasn't just about one night anymore. It wasn't just about them. This was about everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong, like they weren't good enough, like they weren't welcome in certain spaces. It was about creating something meaningful, something that could inspire real, lasting change. "What are you thinking?" Will asked, his voice thoughtful. Jason paused. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "Maybe a protest? A rally?" Will shook his head, even though Jason couldn't see him. "No, not a protest. This isn't just about anger. It's about showing people that we deserve better. We need to build something that lasts." There was a beat of silence on the other end before Jason spoke again, this time softer. "You're right, you're always thinking a step ahead." Will chuckled lightly. "It's not about being ahead, it's about making sure we take the right step. I've got an idea, but I need some time to work it out. I'll call you back." After hanging up, Will sat in silence, his mind spinning with possibilities. Jaden watched him, curiosity written all over his face. "What's the plan, Dad?" Will looked at his son, his expression filled with determination. "We're going to show them how it's done, Jay. We're going to create a space where everyone is welcome. A place that celebrates us, our culture, and our talent. And we're going to do it in a way that no one can ignore." Jaden's eyes widened. "Like a restaurant?" Will nodded slowly, his mind already racing with ideas. "Something like that, but bigger. I want to bring together the best chefs, the best artists, the best of everything our community has to offer. We're going to have a night that celebrates us in a way that Eminence Dining never could." Jade leaned forward, excitement flickering across his face. "That sounds amazing. You think it'll work?" Will's smile was filled with conviction. "It has to. Dining never could, and we're going to invite everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." Jaden's face broke into a grin. "That sounds amazing. You think it'll work?" Will's smile was filled with determination. "It has to." By midday, the story had reached mainstream news. Reporters stood outside Eminence Dining, questioning patrons for their thoughts. Footage of the restaurant's management, stumbling through a generic apology, aired on multiple channels. They used carefully chosen words like misunderstanding and unfortunate error, but their faces betrayed the truth. They were caught off guard, completely unprepared for the wave of backlash that had crashed over them. But the apologies did nothing to calm the storm. Later that day, Tina called, her voice filled with both anger and excitement. "Did you see their so-called apology?" she demanded. "They're trying to brush it off, Will. They think they can just say sorry and move on." Will could hear the frustration in her voice. He had seen the apology, had watched the carefully worded statements that completely missed the point. They weren't sorry for what they had done. They were sorry they had been caught. "We're not letting them off the hook," Will said firmly. "This isn't over." Tina's tone softened, a hint of pride creeping into her voice. "Good, because I've been thinking, what if we turn this into something bigger? Not just one night, but a real movement, a series of events. Bring in people from different parts of the community, artists, chefs, musicians, make it something they can't ignore." Will smiled as the idea took root in his mind. "I like that," he said. "We'll call it the Table for All, a place where everyone has a seat, no matter who they are or where they come from." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Tina spoke again, this time with emotion in her voice. "Well, that's beautiful. Let's do it." Will spent the rest of the day on the phone, reaching out to friends, colleagues, and connections across the city. The response was overwhelming. People wanted to help. They wanted to be part of something that stood against the kind of exclusion they had faced for so long. Chefs volunteered their time, musicians offered to perform, and artists wanted to contribute their work. As the day turned into night, Will sat in his living room, surrounded by notes and ideas. He had always been someone who thrived on action, on making things happen, and this was no different. He wasn't just going to talk about change, he was going to create it. Jaden walked in, glancing at the mess of papers spread across the coffee table. "Looks like you're planning something big," he said, curiosity in his voice. Will looked up at his son, a smile tugging at his lips. Bigger than anything I've done before, he admitted. Jaden nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. I'm in, he said. Whatever you need. Will reached out, pulling his son into a quick hug. I'm going to need all the help I can get, he said. This isn't just about one night. It's about changing the way people see us. It's about making sure no one ever feels the way we did last night. Jaden pulled back, a determined look on his face. Let's do it. Will watched as his son left the room, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. This was bigger than any role he had ever played, any award he had ever won. This was about legacy, about creating something that would outlast him, something that would make the world better for Jaden and for everyone who came after. He picked up his phone and dialed Jason's number. When his friend answered, Will didn't waste any time. Get ready, man, we're about to change the game. The next morning, Will awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. He had always believed that change starts from within, but now he knew something else. Change also requires action, a deliberate challenge to the status quo. And he was ready. Will saw that change required more than just frustration or words. It demanded action, a deliberate challenge to the status quo. As he sat at the breakfast table, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand, his mind replayed the events of the previous night. The sting of humiliation was still fresh, but it had transformed into something stronger. The anger and frustration that had consumed him had now given way to a sense of clarity. He had a plan. Flipping open his notebook, he stared at the blank page for only a moment before writing 3 words in bold, underlining them twice. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about creating something that would last, something that would outgrow the pain of one night and become a movement. Will quickly jotted down everything that came to mind. Chefs, venues, people he could reach out to. This was going to be big, bigger than anything he had done before, even outside of his acting career. But most importantly, it was going to mean something. He glanced up at Jaden, who was still in his pajamas, absent-mindedly eating cereal while scrolling through his phone. Will smiled slightly, wondering if his son understood just how important this moment was, not just for their family, but for the community as a whole. Jay, Will said, catching his son's attention. Jaden looked up, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, Dad. Remember what we talked about yesterday, about building something better? Jaden nodded, his curiosity piqued. You mean the big event? The one where everyone's welcome? Exactly, Will replied, tapping his pen on the notebook. But I don't want it to just be an event. I want to make it bigger than that. A movement. A series of gatherings where people can come together, celebrate who they are, and never have to worry about being turned away. A place where culture, talent, and community all thrive. Jaden's face lit up, a grin spreading across his lips. Different. That's amazing, Dad. You think it'll work? Will's expression was resolute. It has to. Jaden sat forward, clearly excited now. How can I help? Will paused for a moment, considering the question. Jaden had grown up watching his parents work hard to build something meaningful, and now he wanted to be part of it. Will felt a sense of pride knowing his son was ready to step up. Well, for starters, Will said, I need your help spreading the word. You're better at social media than I am, and we need to get people talking. Jaden smirked. Consider it done. Later that day, Will picked up his phone and started making calls. The first person he called was Tina. He already knew she'd be on board. She answered on the second ring, her voice buzzing with energy. Will, you better be calling to tell me we're making this happen, she said, barely able to contain her excitement. Will chuckled. I am. We're going all in, T. I don't just want this to be a response to what happened. I want it to be a celebration, a space where our people can come together, where our culture is front and center. Tina was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, Will could hear the emotion in her voice. Will, that's beautiful. You know I'm in, whatever you need. They talked for a while, discussing logistics and potential partners. Tina had deep connections in both the music and food industries, people who would jump at the chance to be part of something this important. By the time they hung up, Will felt the momentum building. This wasn't just an idea anymore. It was becoming real. The next call was to Jason. He answered immediately, his usual enthusiasm coming through loud and clear. "Will, tell me we're about to light a fire under these people," Jason said, his voice brimming with excitement. "We are," Will confirmed, his tone serious. "But not just with anger. We're going to create something better. I don't just want a protest. I want a celebration, a statement. I want to show the world everything they tried to deny us." Jason was silent for a moment, then spoke, his voice filled with conviction. "You're right, Will. This is bigger than just one night. This is about proving to everyone, including ourselves, that we belong." He exhaled sharply. "I'm all in." Will felt the weight of Jason's words. They had all stood outside that restaurant together, feeling the sting of being dismissed, of being treated as if they weren't enough. But this wasn't about wallowing in that feeling. It was about rising above it. It was about building something stronger. Over the next few days, Will and his friends threw themselves into the project. They reached out to some of the best chefs in Los Angeles, many of whom were people of color who had never been given the recognition they deserved. They contacted artists and musicians, inviting them to contribute their work and be part of something greater than themselves. One afternoon, as Will sat at his dining room table, his phone buzzing non-stop with calls and messages, Jaden sat beside him, scrolling through social media. "Dad, check this out," Jaden said, holding up his phone. On the screen was a viral post. Tina's passionate message about exclusion, followed by Will's video. The comment section was flooded with support. People shared their own experiences of discrimination. Others expressed their excitement for the table for all. Will leaned back in his chair, a slow smile forming. "We're really doing this?" he said. Jaden nodded, admiration in his eyes. "Yeah, and people are listening." That night, Will sat alone in his quiet home, taking in the moment. This was no longer just about what had happened at Eminence Dining. This was about the future. It was about proving that exclusion would never define them. And as Will closed his notebook and set his pen down, he realized something. This wasn't just the beginning of an event. It was the beginning of something much, much bigger. Will and his team reached out to talented chefs, many of whom had never received the recognition they truly deserved. They connected with artists and musicians, inviting them to contribute their work to be part of something that celebrated the very essence of their community. One afternoon, Will sat at his dining room table, his phone buzzing non-stop as he coordinated with venues and partners. Across from him, Jaden scrolled through social media, keeping up with the growing response. "Dad, look at this," Jaden said, holding up his phone. Will glanced over, seeing a post that had gone viral, Tina's powerful message about exclusion, followed by his own video. The comment section was flooded with support. People shared their own experiences, their own struggles, and most importantly, their excitement for the table for all. Will leaned back in his chair, a smile of satisfaction spreading across his face. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" Jaden nodded, admiration clear in his eyes. "Yeah, and people are listening." That night, Will sat down with Jada to discuss the project. She had been his rock, his confidant, the partner who had stood by him through every high and low. He knew he needed her support to make this work. As Will outlined the plan, Jada listened intently, her eyes never leaving his. When he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. "You've always been about creating opportunities, Will. This is powerful. This is going to change things." Will squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth of her encouragement. "I hope so. I just don't want this to be another viral moment that fades away. I want it to last." Jada smiled, love and pride shining in her eyes. "And it will. Because it's not just about one night. It's about the message, the people, the community, and that's something that can't be ignored. The final preparations. As the days turned into weeks, the pieces began to fall into place. They secured a venue, a spacious converted warehouse in downtown Los Angeles. It had the raw beauty and open space that made it the perfect backdrop for the event. Chefs carefully crafted their menus, drawing from the rich culinary traditions of their cultures. Musicians rehearsed, preparing for a night that would be unforgettable. Will knew this was about so much more than food or music. It was about the people, the ones who had been turned away, the ones who had been made to feel as though they didn't belong. This was their space, a space where they could be proud of who they were, where they could celebrate their heritage without fear of judgment or exclusion. The night before the event, Will sat in the empty venue, the soft glow of dimmed lights illuminating the neatly set tables. He let his mind wander, imagining the laughter, the conversations, the sense of belonging that would fill the space in just a few hours. A lump formed in his throat, a mix of pride and anticipation. Jaden walked over, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. "You good, Dad?" Will nodded, his eyes misty. "Yeah, Jay, I'm ready. Ready for tomorrow. Ready for this to finally happen." Jaden smiled. "It's going to be amazing. People are already talking about it online. Everyone's excited." Will turned to his son, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of you, Jay. You've been right here with me through all of this. You're part of the reason we're doing this." Jaden's eyes softened, and he hugged his father tightly. "I'm proud of you, Dad. You're making a difference." As they stood there, father and son, surrounded by the promise of what was to come, Will knew this was just the beginning. Tomorrow they would show the world what it meant to truly have a seat at the table. And it wouldn't stop there. They were building something that would last, a movement that would continue to grow long after the lights were turned off and the tables were cleared. This wasn't just about one night. It was about a lifetime of change. A chance to rewrite the narrative, to make sure that no one ever again was made to feel like they didn't belong. And that, Will knew, was worth everything. The evening of the event had finally arrived. The downtown Los Angeles venue had been completely transformed. Rows of tables draped in white linen were adorned with candles and elegant floral arrangements, creating a warm and inviting atmosphere. String lights hung from the rafters, casting a soft golden glow over the space. A stage stood at the far end, ready for the musicians who would soon bring the night to life. The air was filled with the rich, savory scent of the dishes being prepared, each one a tribute to culture, history, and resilience. Will stood at the entrance, dressed in a tailored suit that struck the perfect balance between sophistication and comfort. He watched as the first guests arrived, greeted personally by him and his team. There was something different about tonight. The energy in the room wasn't just excitement, it was purpose. Families, activists, artists, and community leaders filtered in. They were people from all walks of life, all connected by a shared experience. People who had, at some point, been made to feel unwelcome. But not tonight. Tonight they belonged. Tina arrived early, her radiant smile lighting up the room. She hugged Will tightly. "You did it, Will," she said, her voice filled with pride. "This place, it's beautiful." Will nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. "We all did it, T. I couldn't have done this without you." Tina looked around, her eyes glistening. "You know what's funny?" she mused. "They tried to keep us out, and now we're the ones creating something bigger than them." "Ha ha!" Will squeezed her hand. They weren't just making a statement tonight. They were building something that would continue to grow. The chefs emerged, bringing out their carefully curated dishes, each one telling a story. Nigerian jollof rice, Jamaican jerk chicken, Southern collard greens, Haitian griot. The menu was a tapestry of culture and history, each bite a reminder of resilience. The evening unfolded like a dream, guests laughing, sharing stories, making connections. The musicians played, their melodies weaving through the space, lifting the energy even higher. Will watched it all unfold, his heart swelling with pride. This was their table. This was their night. And this was just the beginning. Will stood near the entrance, dressed in a tailored suit that balanced sophistication with understated comfort. He took a deep breath, surveying the room, letting the moment sink in. Seeing his vision come to life was almost surreal. Every detail had been carefully arranged to create the perfect experience for the people he wanted to honor. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about showing what could be achieved when people were given a space to celebrate who they were. Guests began arriving, each one personally greeted by Will and his friends. Families, activists, artists, and community leaders filled the venue. People from all walks of life united by a common experience of exclusion. Many had been made to feel unwelcome in places like Eminence Dining. But tonight was different. Tonight, the energy was electric, buzzing with hope and excitement. It was as if everyone in the room shared an unspoken understanding. This was something special. Tina arrived early, her bright smile lighting up the space. As she embraced Will, her voice was tinged with pride. "You did it, Will. This place, it's beautiful." Will nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. "We all did it, T. I couldn't have done this without you." Tina looked around, her eyes shining. "You know what's funny? They tried to keep us out, and now here we are, taking up space, creating our own table. It's powerful." Will squeezed her hand, understanding exactly what she meant. They weren't just making a statement tonight. They were building something that would continue to grow long after this night was over. The chefs, each one personally selected by Will and his team, began bringing out their creations. The dishes were a celebration of cultural heritage and culinary talent. Nigerian jollof rice, Jamaican jerk chicken, Southern collard greens, Haitian griot. Every dish told a story. Every flavor was a testament to the resilience and creativity of the community that had come together for this night. But it wasn't just about the food, it was about connection. The chefs took center stage, interacting with guests, sharing the stories behind their dishes. It was more than a meal, it was an experience. Will watched as guests began to eat, their faces lighting up with delight at the flavors. He saw families talking, strangers laughing together, people bonding over shared experiences. This was exactly what he had envisioned. People coming together, sharing in something bigger than themselves. As the evening continued, smooth jazz and soulful melodies filled the air. Musicians performed live, many of whom had faced their own struggles for acceptance in the industry. The music, rich with emotion, set the perfect tone for the night. Then Tina took the stage. The moment she opened her mouth to sing, the room fell silent. Her powerful voice carried a message of hope and resilience, weaving through the struggles they had faced, the obstacles they had overcome, and the beauty of their shared journey. Every lyric, every note resonated deeply. The crowd was captivated, their attention fixed on her as she sang. Jason joined Will, a drink in his hand, scanning the room. His voice was filled with admiration as he said, "Look at this, man, look at what you did." Will smiled, his eyes misty. "Look at what we did," he corrected. "This isn't just about me, it's about all of us." Jason nodded, raising his glass. "To creating our own table, to making sure we're never turned away again." Will clinked his glass against Jason's, the two men sharing a quiet moment of triumph. Just weeks ago, they had stood outside Eminence Dining, humiliated and angry, but tonight, they stood in a space they had created, one that celebrated everything they were. As the night went on, Will took time to walk around the room, stopping at each table, talking to the guests. He listened to their stories. Some shared their own experiences of discrimination, while others spoke of their dreams and aspirations. The conversations were raw, real, and deeply personal. This wasn't just a dinner, it was community. At one table, he met an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, who had brought her grandchildren to the event. She looked up at Will, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Mr. Smith, I want to thank you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've lived a long time and I've seen a lot of things. But tonight I feel like there's hope, like maybe, just maybe, my grandchildren will grow up in a world where they don't have to fight to belong." Will felt his chest tighten with emotion. He knelt beside her, his voice soft but firm. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. That's exactly why we're doing this. For them. For all of us." The night continued, each moment more meaningful than the last. The laughter, the music, the conversations, they all came together to create something beautiful. People danced, they sang, they shared in the joy of simply being in a space that was theirs. Jaden joined Will as the evening began to wind down, his face glowing with excitement. "Dad, this is amazing. I mean, look at everyone, they're so happy." He will put an arm around his son, pulling him close. "Yeah, Jay, they are. And this is just the beginning. We're going to keep doing this. We're going to make sure that everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong knows that they have a place at our table." Jaden's face lit up with admiration. "I'm in. Whatever you need." Will smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I'm proud of you, Jay. You've been with me every step of the way, and I couldn't have done this without you." As the last guests began to leave, Will stood at the door, thanking each one personally for coming. He saw the smiles on their faces, the hope in their eyes, and he knew this was only the beginning. There was still so much work to be done, but tonight had proven something. They didn't need a seat at someone else's table. They didn't need a seat at someone else's table. They had built their own, and this was just the start of something extraordinary. Will felt his chest tighten with emotion, his eyes misting as he knelt beside Mrs. Thompson. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. That's exactly why we're doing this. For them. For all of us." The night continued, each moment becoming more meaningful than the last. The laughter, the music, the conversations, all of it blended together into something beautiful, something that truly mattered. People danced, they sang, they celebrated. They embraced the joy of simply being in a space that was theirs, a space where they were welcomed. As the night began to wind down, Jaden joined Will, his face glowing with excitement. "Dad, this is amazing. I mean, look at everyone. They're so happy." Will put an arm around his son, pulling him close. "Yeah, Jay, they are. And this is just the beginning. We're going to keep doing this. We're going to make sure that everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong knows that they do, that they have a place at our table." Jaden smiled, his eyes filled with admiration. "I'm proud of you, Dad. You're making a difference." Will's heart swelled with pride, his own eyes misting again. "I'm proud of you, Jay. You've been with me every step of the way. I couldn't have done this without you." As the event drew to a close, Will took the stage, and the room fell into a hushed silence. He looked out over the crowd, scanning the faces of the people who had come to share in this moment. He took a deep breath, his voice steady and strong as he spoke. "Tonight, we came together, not just to eat, not just to share music or laughter, but to prove a point, that we belong, that we have a right to be here, to celebrate who we are, to take up space. This is our table, and it's a table for all of us." The crowd erupted into applause, cheers echoing through the venue. Will smiled, his heart full. This was what he had dreamed of. People coming together, creating something meaningful, something that would continue to grow far beyond this night. As guests began to leave, Will stood by the door, thanking each one personally for coming. He saw the smiles on their faces, the hope in their eyes, and he knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much work to be done, but tonight had proven something. Change was possible, and they had the power to create it themselves. After the last guest had left, Will looked around the now empty venue. The tables were still covered in the remnants of a meal well enjoyed. Candles flickered softly, casting warm, golden light over the space. Tina, Jason, and Jaden joined him, the four of them standing together, taking in the aftermath of what they had built. "We did it," Tina said, her voice thick with emotion. "We really did it." Will nodded, his eyes glistening. "Yeah, we did, and we're going to keep doing it. This is just the beginning." Jason clapped Will on the back, a broad smile on his face. "To the next one, then. Let's make it even bigger." Jaden grinned. "Count me in." Will looked at his friends, his heart filled with gratitude. They had turned a moment of humiliation into something powerful, something that would continue to inspire others. This was their table, and they were just getting started. Together they walked out of the venue, the lights dimming behind them. They had created something beautiful, a space where everyone belonged, a space where no one was turned away. And as they stepped into the cool Los Angeles night, Will knew they were on the brink of something extraordinary. This wasn't just about one night. This was about changing the game, about making sure that everyone had a seat at the table, and that was something worth fighting for. In the days that followed, the buzz surrounding the table for all was everywhere. Photos and videos from the night flooded social media. The images showed people from all walks of life gathered together in joy and unity. It wasn't just a dinner, it had become a statement, a symbol of defiance, a reminder that they didn't need permission to belong, because they already did. Exclusionary practices that had gone unchecked for far too long. Eminence Dining had built its reputation on exclusivity, but now that very foundation was crumbling under the weight of its own prejudice. One afternoon, Will received a message from a reporter requesting an interview. They wanted to hear his thoughts on the fallout from the restaurant scandal. He hesitated. This wasn't about revenge for him. It never had been. He hadn't set out to take down Eminence Dining, only to shine a light on a much larger issue. Still, he knew that avoiding the conversation wouldn't change anything. After some thought, he agreed to the interview under one condition. The focus had to be on the table for all and what they were building. He wasn't interested in dwelling on the restaurant's failure. He wanted to talk about progress, about creating something better. The reporter agreed, and the next day Will found himself sitting across from her in a quiet studio, cameras rolling. "You've been at the center of a major story these past few weeks," the reporter began. "Eminence Dining is facing significant backlash, and many see it as a direct result of your experience. How do you feel about what's happened to them?" Will took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "What happened to us at Eminence Dining, it wasn't an isolated incident. It's something that happens to people of color all the time, in all kinds of spaces. What we experienced was just one example of a much bigger problem. And it's not just about one restaurant. It's about a culture that decides who belongs and who doesn't." He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "With the table for all, we're trying to show that there's a different way, that we don't have to accept being excluded, that we can create our own spaces, places where everyone is welcome, where everyone has a seat at the table." The reporter nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think Eminence Dining can recover from this?" Will shrugged. "That's up to them. If they're serious about changing, maybe. But it's not about what they say. It's about what they do, and it's going to take more than a few apologies to make things right." The interview aired that evening, and Will's words struck a chord with viewers. The conversation shifted. Instead of just focusing on Eminence Dining's failures, the public started paying closer attention to the table for all and the movement that had grown in its wake. People resonated with the message, not just those who had personally experienced exclusion, but those who believed in the importance of real inclusivity. A few weeks later, the inevitable happened. Eminence Dining closed its doors. Citing financial challenges and a difficult business environment, the owners made the decision to shut down indefinitely. The news barely made headlines. By then, the public had moved on. They had turned their focus toward the future, toward something bigger than a single restaurant's downfall. Will stood outside the now shuttered establishment one evening, looking at the darkened windows. There was no satisfaction in seeing it empty, no victory in its closure. But there was a lesson in it, one that businesses, institutions, and individuals couldn't ignore. Jason joined him, standing by his side. "Kind of poetic, isn't it?" he said, his voice quiet. "They tried to keep us out, and now there's nothing left to keep anyone out of." Will nodded, his gaze still on the empty space. "Yeah, but it's not just about them," he said. "It's about what we do next." Jason turned to look at him, a grin creeping across his face. "And what we're doing next? It's gonna change everything." Will met his friend's gaze, a sense of determination settling in his chest. They had taken something painful, something that had hurt, and transformed it into something powerful. They had shown the world that they wouldn't be silent, that they wouldn't accept being turned away. And now they were building something that would last. A movement that would continue to grow long after Eminence Dining was forgotten. Months passed, and the impact of the Table for All only deepened. What had started as a single event, a way to reclaim their dignity, had turned into a full-fledged movement. More dinners followed, each one growing in scale. Cities beyond Los Angeles took notice. People reached out, asking how they could replicate the idea in their communities. One evening, Will stood on his balcony, looking out over the city. Jaden joined him, leaning on the railing. "Dad," he said, his voice filled with excitement, "I saw a post today about a Table for All dinner in Chicago. It looked amazing. People were just happy." Will smiled, nodding. "That's the point, Jay. It's not just about us. It's about everyone who's ever felt left out, who's ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. We're giving people the opportunity to change that." Jaden looked at his father, admiration clear in his eyes. "You really made a difference. I mean, it's everywhere now." Will wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders. "We did, Jay. All of us. Everyone who showed up. Everyone who cared enough to be a part of this. That's what matters." The dinners became annual events, but they were more than just gatherings now. They were a statement, a reminder that they belonged, that they didn't need permission to take up space. On the anniversary of the first dinner, Will stood on stage at an even larger venue, looking out at the packed room. Families, artists, chefs, community leaders, all of them had come together to celebrate. He took a deep breath, his voice carrying across the space. "A year ago, we were told we didn't belong, but instead of accepting that, we created our own space, a space for all of us. And tonight, I want to remind you all, you belong. Your stories matter, and together we can create a world where everyone has a seat at the table." The applause that followed was deafening. Will smiled, his heart full. This was only the beginning. They weren't just fighting against exclusion anymore. They were building something better. And that was a movement that no one could ignore. "To change everything," he said with certainty. Will turned to him, a determined expression settling over his face. "That's exactly the plan," he replied. They had turned what could have been a painful and humiliating experience into something powerful. This wasn't about bringing down a single restaurant. It was about creating lasting change. As they stood there in the cool night air, Will reflected on how far things had come in just a few short weeks. What had started as frustration and exclusion had evolved into a movement that was spreading across the country. The Table for All wasn't just an event anymore. It had become a statement, a call for inclusion, and a platform for change. Over the next few months, the movement continued to gain momentum. Cities across the country began organizing their own Table for All events, inspired by Will's initiative. Community leaders, activists, and local business owners embraced the idea, transforming it into a national conversation about representation, belonging, and dignity. One evening, Will sat in his home office, scrolling through messages and emails. Invitations had started pouring in. Requests to speak at conferences, partnerships with influential organizations, and interest from major media outlets. The movement had taken on a life of its own. He exhaled deeply, overwhelmed but also deeply grateful. Jaden walked in, holding his phone. "Dad, check this out," he said excitedly. He handed the phone to Will, who saw a news report about a Table for All dinner happening in Chicago. The headline read, "From Rejection to Revolution, How One Idea is Changing the Way We Gather." Will chuckled, shaking his head. "This is bigger than I ever imagined." Jaden grinned. "That's because people needed this, Dad. They needed a space where they could feel like they belong." Will nodded, looking at his son with pride. "Yeah, Jay, and it's only the beginning." The next weekend, Will and his team hosted another Table for All event in Los Angeles. The venue was packed. Musicians performed, chefs from diverse backgrounds showcased their talents, and people from all walks of life came together. It was a celebration of culture, resilience, and community. Tina approached Will during the event, a drink in hand, her eyes filled with excitement. "Can you believe this?" she asked, gesturing to the room full of people. Will smiled. "Honestly, yeah, I can. This was always bigger than just us. It was about everyone." Jason joined them, clapping Will on the back. "Man, this is history in the making, and we're just getting started." As the night continued, Will took the stage. The crowd quieted, all eyes on him. He looked out at the room filled with faces of different backgrounds, ages, and stories. The energy was electric, full of possibility. "Tonight," he began, "we're not just here to eat. We're here to celebrate, to remind the world that we belong, that no one has the right to tell us otherwise. When they closed their doors on us, we opened our own doors, and now we're never closing them again." The room erupted in applause, cheers ringing out. Will felt the emotion in his chest, the overwhelming feeling of purpose. This was more than a moment. It was a movement. As the event wound down and the last guests trickled out, Will stood at the door, thanking each person. He saw their smiles, felt their gratitude, and knew, without a doubt, that they had created something meaningful. After everyone had left, Will, Tina, Jason, and Jaden stood together in the empty venue, the remnants of the night surrounding them. "We did it," Tina said, her voice filled with emotion. Will nodded, looking at each of them. "Yeah, we did. And we're going to keep doing it, because this is just the beginning." Jason smirked. "So, what's next?" Will exhaled, his mind already racing with ideas. "We take this national. We make sure everyone knows that they have a seat at the table." As they walked out into the night, the city lights glowing around them, Will felt an unshakable sense of conviction. This was more than just an idea, it was a promise. A promise that no one would ever be made to feel like they didn't belong. A promise that would continue to grow far beyond this night. And Will? He was ready to see just how far they could take it. Will turned to look at his friend, a sense of determination settling in his chest. They had taken something ugly, something that had deeply hurt them, and transformed it into a force for good. They had shown the world that they wouldn't be silenced, that they wouldn't accept being turned away. Now they were building something that would last, a movement that would continue to grow long after Eminence Dining was forgotten. As they walked away from the empty building, Will knew they were just getting started. The fall of Eminence Dining wasn't the end, it was the beginning. They were ready to keep building, to keep fighting, and to ensure that everyone had a seat at the table. Months passed since the first Table for All dinner, but the impact of that night still resonated across the city. What had started as an evening to push back against exclusion had grown into something much larger, a movement that people embraced as their own. More dinners followed, each one held at a different venue, each one welcoming more people, and each one celebrating the diversity and unity of their community. Will watched with a deep sense of pride as the dinners spread beyond Los Angeles, capturing the attention of other cities. People who had heard the story, watched the videos, and read the posts wanted to bring Table for All to their own communities. They reached out to Will, asking how they could replicate the idea. Along with Tina, Jason, and the rest of their friends, Will shared everything they had learned, encouraging others to create their own spaces for inclusion. One evening, Will stood on the balcony of his home, looking out at the twinkling lights of the city. The night air was crisp, and the hum of life below felt different tonight. Jaden joined him, leaning on the railing with a smile. "You know, Dad," Jaden said, his voice thoughtful, "I saw a post today about a Table for All dinner in Chicago. It looked amazing. People were just having the best time." Will smiled and nodded. "That's the point, Jay. It's not just about us. It's about everyone who's ever felt left out, anyone who's been made to feel like they don't belong. We're giving people the chance to change that for themselves." Jaden turned to his father, admiration clear in his eyes. "You really made a difference. I mean, it's everywhere now." Will wrapped an arm around Jaden's shoulders. "I couldn't have done it alone. It's everyone who's been part of this, everyone who showed up, everyone who cared enough to make a difference. That's what matters." The dinners became more than just events. They became a statement, a reminder that people had the power to create spaces where everyone was welcome and no one was turned away. Table for All grew into a tradition, expanding and evolving, touching lives across the country. On the anniversary of the first dinner, Will stood on the stage at a new venue, an even larger warehouse, filled to capacity with people who had come to celebrate. He looked out at the crowd. Families, friends, artists, and chefs, all there because they believed in the message that had started with one night of exclusion and had transformed into a movement of belonging. Taking a deep breath, he let his voice carry across the room. "Thank you all for being here tonight. A year ago, we were told we didn't belong, but instead of accepting that, we created our own space. A space for all of us. And tonight, I want to remind each and every one of you that you belong, that your stories matter, and that together we can create a world where everyone has a seat at the table." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing off the walls and filling the room with energy, hope, and determination. Will smiled, his heart full. This was only the beginning. Table for All was more than just a response to discrimination. It was a promise for the future. A promise that they would keep building, keep pushing, and keep creating until everyone knew they belonged. And with that promise, Will knew their work was far from over. But he also knew they were ready. They had the strength of an entire community behind them. Together they were creating something that would last, something that would change lives, and something that would inspire others for years to come. After the event, as the last guests trickled out, Will stood by the door, personally thanking each one for coming. He saw the smiles on their faces, the hope in their eyes, and he knew that what they had built was real. There was still much work to be done, but tonight had proven that change was possible, that people had the power to create it themselves. When the final guest had left, Will turned back toward the venue. The tables were still covered in the remnants of a meal well enjoyed, the candles flickering softly in the dimmed lights. Tina, Jason, and Jaden joined him, standing together and taking in the moment. "We did it," Tina said, her voice full of emotion. Will nodded, his eyes glistening. "Yeah, we did, and we're going to keep doing it. This is just the beginning." Jason clapped Will on the back, a broad smile on his face. "To the next one, then. Let's make it even bigger." Jaden grinned. "Count me in." Will looked at his friends, his heart filled with gratitude. They had turned a moment of humiliation into something powerful, something that would continue to inspire others. This was their table, and they were just getting started. As they stepped into the cool Los Angeles night, Will felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. They were on the brink of something extraordinary. This wasn't just about one night. This was about changing the game, about making sure that everyone had a seat at the table. And that was something worth fighting for. I want to remind each and every one of you that you belong, that your stories matter, and that together we can create a world where everyone has a seat at the table. The applause was deafening, echoing through the space, filling it with hope and determination. Will smiled, his heart full. This was just the beginning. Table for All was more than a response to discrimination. It was a promise for the future, a commitment to keep building, keep pushing, and keep creating until no one ever felt excluded again. With that promise, Will knew their work was far from over. But he also knew they were ready. They had the strength of an entire community behind them. Together they were creating something that would last, something that would change lives, and something that would inspire others for years to come. Thank you for being with us until the end of this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new stories. Share this video with your friends. Maybe they'll find something meaningful in it too. And be sure to check out the other videos on the channel. There are many more inspiring stories to come.